Okay. Now I want to do something that will cover two things. One is will illustrate this issue of composability. Again, all of this stuff can be done very formal, and I will do it very informal. Again, to give you the feeling of the things, and also to give you an example of how proofs are not only a good tool of analysis in crypto, but also a design tool. When you approach a problem that you want to solve with proof in mind, saying, okay, I am building this thing and will have to prove this and that, it actually helps you designing. So this is a nice example of how these things work. There is this notion called authenticators. And authenticators, let me first say this thing. We will consider two models. One model that we will call unauthenticated link models. U is for unauthenticated, M is for model. This is the regular model we have been talking so far, a model in which the attacker is a man-in-the-middle attacker with all the capabilities, changing, injecting messages, corrupting parties, corrupting session, querying state, all of these capabilities that we mentioned. That is what we call the real-world attacker, that it works on links, communication links that are unauthenticated by themselves. You have to put crypto to make them authenticated. But then we will consider also an AM, which is the authenticated links model, which is an idealized model in which if Alice says this message is to Bob, this message will be delivered to Bob without any change and as coming from Alice. Okay? So there is this magic idealized model in which things, basically the attacker is a passive attacker. Okay? Still, this attacker can do everything else. It can manage messages when they are delivered, interleaving things. It can query, do these learning queries, session state queries, session key queries, everything. But it cannot modify things that go over the wire. Now, that ability to modify stuff that goes the wire gives the attacker an unbelievable strong capability. Now, authenticator is something that we define in a formal way, but not here, as a compiler from the ideal AM secure protocols to the realistic secure protocols. Which means that I tell you the following. Give me any protocol, key exchange protocol, that is secure in the ideally authenticated model. I will transform it to something that is secure in the realistic unauthenticated model. Okay? And anything that does that, I will call it an authenticator. By the way, to define something like this, to claim something like this, to specify something like this, you need all these models and you need composition and you need all these elements that I am only mentioning by words and not showing how to do them. But it can be done. You have to believe me on that. But let me show you. Okay, so that's what I said so far. An authenticator is a compiler for AM to secure. Reduces the problem of designing and analyzing protocols from the complex to the simple AM. For example, here is an example of a protocol that is easy to prove secure in the AM. That's the original Diffie-Hellman protocol, right? The Diffie-Hellman protocol, if against a passive attacker over AM, over authenticated channels, is simple to prove. Actually, you have to be a little bit more careful than this, but essentially is just reducing to the decisional Diffie-Hellman assumption. Okay? I send G to the X, you send G to the Y. The attacker cannot change anything, so he doesn't know anything about the key. Again, everything, when you go to the formalities, things are less trivial, but they definitely are much simpler than going and proving things in the unauthenticated model. So do we have authenticators like this? I mean, it's not obvious that you would have things like that, but we do have. And the definition of an authenticator, everything is sketch of an idea, is a message sending protocol that can be interactive. An authenticator gets as an input a message and two parties, Alice, Bob, and the message. And what it is supposed to do is to deliver the message from Alice to Bob with the following guarantee. Each time that Bob sends a message M to A, it says, I mean, here I have, so Bob is supposed to say, I sent a message M. Okay. Alice has to say, I sent a message M to Bob, or she will say, receive the message M from A. An authenticator is a protocol. Again, it can be interactive. It can take as many rounds as you want. But it provides the guarantee that if Alice registers, I received M from Bob, then it holds that Bob registered that he sent the message to Bob. Okay? So anything that you get from Bob must have been sent by Bob. Okay? And anything you send, I mean, things that you send to Bob are not guaranteed to get to Bob. Okay? But if something comes to Bob and he is convinced that it came from Alice, then it really was sent by Alice. So the AM model says the attacker cannot change anything that goes over the link. So when Alice sends G to the X intended to Bob, okay, and if change it G to the X so wait when okay, so when Bob gets convinced that he got something from Alice, okay, the issue with the man in the middle of Eve is if Alice wants to talk to Eve or gets convinced that you exchange the key with Eve, and Bob gets convinced that he exchanged the key with Eve, it's fine, right? That's allowed. Eve can. The problem is when Bob thinks that the key exchange with Eve actually came from Alice. Right? If okay, the well, forget signatures. Now we are talking about the AM, right?
Yeah. In this case, he can't he just to himself like that. Oh, I see.
You know, something that Eve can do is can take the same G to the X that Alice sent and send it on her name. That is fine in this model. She can do that. She can copy a message and send it on her own name. That's fine. The point is that if Bob is convinced that something came from Alice, then Alice sent that something. Okay? It's simply the attacker is passive. Okay? It can look I mean, it's not passive is not a good word because he's not passive in the sense that he can manage, you know, the communication when things come, or he can stop messages, but he cannot inject the message as coming from a party that didn't generate that message. Okay, so now I didn't touch on replay attacks in here. So if the model wants to capture that, that the attacker should not replay messages, because in this definition, an attacker could replay messages. If Alice sends a message to Bob, then in principle, the attacker is allowed to send that message many times to Bob, because the only thing I said is everything that comes to Bob as sent by A, it was actually sent by A. But this can be repeated by the attacker. If you need to capture issues of replay, then you have to either concatenate an ID and message identifier to the message, or use nonces. Let me not get into the technicalities here. I will show you an example of Authenticator, and you'll see how we deal with replay. But this is the important theorem, which says that if A is an authenticator and P is any protocol that is securing the AM model, okay? Now, let's transform P into a protocol P prime, which does the following. For every message in P, to each message in P, we are going to apply an authenticator. Okay, so if the first message was send G to the X to B, then we will apply to G to the X an authenticator, right? Authenticator is also a protocol that ensures correct delivery of messages. So any protocol, this is not only for key exchange protocols, any protocol in the AM, that you take that transformation for every message in the AM, you apply an authenticator, then you can prove that that transform protocol is secure in the UM model. Okay, so this is a general technique and a general theorem that shows how to transform things that are secure in the UM in the AM into things that are secure in the UM model. Okay, and now let me show you how this works actually with respect to key exchange protocols. So here is a signature-based authenticator. In this authenticator, it is assumed that each party has a signature key, and let's forget about certificates for the moment. Someone already distributed the certificates or the public keys to everyone. Of course, you can add them to the protocol, but I don't want to complicate it. So here is a way of doing the authenticator. A wants to send a message MSG to B. So, okay, she sends these two things. Now, once Bob gets something from A, he will send back, okay, I'm Bob, here is a nonce, and Alice will answer with a signature on the nonce, on the message, and the identity of B. Okay? So this, everyone can easily get convinced that this is actually authenticating the submission of the message. Why? It has the nonce because we care about replay. I said if you want replay, then you put a nonce. So we put a nonce. And by the way, I use the word nonce as if everyone knows that. Actually, nonce means a random used once value. Okay, it's a typical thing used against replay. I send a random value that I choose at random, so the probability of repetition is small. So when I get back this signature, I know that this signature was created for this run of the protocol and not for some other run of the protocol. You need uniqueness, yeah. But when I use the word nonce, think about it as a random value, because some cases using counters is problematic. So I don't want to get into the things. Problem of counters is that if you have a counter and you, as a party, crash, then the question is where does the counter start from? So there are issues like that. So just think about these as random values.
And my nonce.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
A is convinced she sent a message to B.
Wait. Who is convinced?
A, when A is convinced she sent the message to B, B should be convinced that he received a message from A. This is what we want to achieve from understanding this.
What I achieve is that, okay, and then let me do one more. Okay, I didn't do it. So at the end of this protocol, so the way of this slide should have had here A writes, records, I send, or here I send message M to B, okay? Actually here I send message M to B, and here B will write, I received message M from A, okay? And the claim is that if you do that, each time that B will write, I received message M from A, before that, A wrote, I sent message M to B.
It's just this direction, not the other.
Yeah, this is one this one is in one direction, exactly. We will see how to do it in two directions, but this is one direction. Now, everyone that would have tried to design this would have signed the nonce and the message. Here it's interesting that without this B, actually this will not be secure. Okay? It is necessary that A will sign not just the message, but to say who she intended the message to. Okay? And you can see that if she didn't write that, then you could take something that she intended to Eve and routed it to B or something like this. But you'll see that actually the need to put B here, which comes very easily when you try to prove the authenticator, you see how it influences when I apply this to a key exchange protocol. So let's see how to use authenticators to prove the security of the ISO protocol. So the ISO protocol was this one, okay, was the one in which each one signed their own Diffie-Hellman, the peer's Diffie-Hellman, and the peer's identity. Okay, this was the protocol. Now let's see how this protocol is obtained by applying a signature-based authenticator to the basic Diffie-Hellman. Okay, so this protocol is secure in the AM. Therefore, if we apply to each message an authenticator, the result will be a protocol that is secure in the UM. That's what the theorem about authenticators says. So let's look at it. So here is how the signature-based authenticator looks. Okay. Now remember that in the protocol, the first thing that A does, she sends message G to the X to Bob. So the message is G to the X. Okay. Now Bob will respond with the identity and with a nonce, G to the Y. G to the Y has the property of being a Diffie-Hellman value, but in this case, let's look at it as a nonce. Since for each Diffie-Hellman run you choose a fresh Y, then this acts actually as a nonce, and therefore we have an authenticator by taking A and signing G to the Y, the nonce, G to the X, the message, and the identity of who she intended the message to be. Okay? So what you see here is the authenticator from the side of Alice proving that she sent that message to Bob. When Bob gets the message here, he knows actually that this came from A. All right? Now, let's do the same thing from Bob to Alice. The message will be G to the Y. That's the message that Bob wants to authenticate to Alice. And the nonce will be G to the X, this thing that she sent before. Now, Bob will send the signature. It's a B, GY, the message, and the signature on the message, on the nonce, and on the identity of A. Here I changed the order of things in the basic authenticator. Before first you send the message, then the nonce, then here the nonce was sent first and the message was sent second. Of course, you know, these things you have to be careful. Sometimes doing something like this breaks the security, so you have to show that these variants are still secure authenticators. But now we have that the original protocol, which was just GXGY, right, and nothing else, we applied 2E authenticators in both ways. So it must be that this protocol is secure as the original Diffie-Hellman, but now in the unauthenticated channels model. Okay? So basically, that's the end of the proof. Of course, you know, when you write down these proofs, it's more complicated than this, but that's what it is. Okay? So modulo technical details, this is what you get. And you see that the need to write A inside the signature and the need to write B inside the signature actually is captured or derived from the authenticator. So as you see, in this case, I showed you the ISO protocol and said I want to prove it to you, and here I prove it using an authenticator. But think about it, that I could start just from Diffie-Hellman, okay, design whatever authenticator, and now I have different, for each authenticator, I will have a variant of a authenticated Diffie-Hellman. I mean, Diffie-Hellman that runs over unauthenticated channels. And actually, I can do that. I can do that with other authenticators. For example, this authenticator. This is a public key encryption-based authenticator. The authenticator here works like this. A wants to send the message to B. B does the following. In this case, the parties have public keys for an encryption scheme, for example, RSA or El Gamal. So what B does, it takes the public key of A, encrypts a random key K under the public key of A, sends it to A, and A now responds with, I am A, here is my message, she sent it here or here, doesn't matter, and here is a MAC using the key K that B sent under the MAC on the message and on the identity of B. And this, you know, intuitively, it's an authenticator because the only party that can decrypt K is A. So if A is able to produce a message under key K on the message and the identity, then B says, okay, definitely, she got my key, she did the MAC, my identity is there, so it must have been sent for me. So this would be another form of an authenticator.
Do you need the first message?
No, you don't need the first message. I'm building it just because I want to use it for the Diffie-Hellman. Okay, so applying the encryption authenticator to AM Diffie-Hellman, we have that. Actually, this is one in which I'm already applying in both directions. So let's see, A wants to get a message from B. So you see, here is here's the version of the protocol in which the message is not sent first. So A wants to get a message from B, so she sends an encryption of a key K1. B will decrypt K1 and will run a MAC on his message, which is G to the Y, with the identity A that he intends to and sends to A. At the same time, he wants to get an authentication from a message of Alice, so he encrypts a key under Alice's public key, sends it, and Alice will take that key, will decrypt it, and will use it to MAC her message G to the X and the identity of Bob. And what you see here is another secure Diffie-Hellman over the UM, because we built it by taking the AM Diffie-Hellman and applying to it an authenticator. This this protocol is actually, it has a name, it's called SCIM. And it's the, I mean, if any one of you knows about the IKE protocol, the key exchange protocol of IPsec, there is version 1 and version 2. Version 1 has 2 modes of authentication, one with public key encryption, one with signatures. So this is the mode of IKE v1 that uses public key encryption. Okay? You see, this really gives very simple proofs. And again, the point that I want to make and stress is that it's not only a tool for proof, it's also a tool for design. Okay? Now you can get, for example, you can take an authenticator that is based on shared keys. So Alice and Bob have a shared key that they shared somehow before. How do you use them to run an authenticated Diffie-Hellman? Well, there is a simple authenticator, which means I send you a message, you send me a nonce, and I send a MAC on the message and the nonce and the identity, and then you get yet another variant of Diffie-Hellman. I love authenticators. I really have to confess that I love authenticators. Unfortunately, life is not always as elegant, and authenticators are not always possible because, you know, if you build a protocol like this, then the authenticator works. If someone build a protocol in some other way, maybe you can find a way of decomposing it. The truth is that, for example, the SCIM protocol is something actually I designed for IKE version 1, and I didn't think about authenticators. And I was lucky enough that when you write it as an authenticator, you get the same protocol. But many times it's not possible. Sometimes even if you can find a decomposition, actually it's ugly because, you know, you force the protocol to look in some way, and actually you don't get something at least elegant. But when you can use the things, actually you get things that usually are more compact, more elegant, easier to understand, easier to prove. And by the way, one of the advantages of simple, relatively simple proof, none of these are very simple, but relatively simple proofs, is that it's also easier to maintain the protocol. I mean, when people start changing the protocol, then it's usually easier to see, what is broken or what can be changed, etc. Now, the next chapter is mainly about this Sigma protocol, which is a signature-based protocol, not encryption-based protocol. What's nice about the protocol is that it is actually version 1 and version 2 use that protocol, but now the new version of TLS 1.3, actually also use a variant of that protocol. So it's interesting as an example, and also because it demonstrates all kind of things, including how you have to adapt protocols to properties or features that the real world asks for, and you didn't necessarily think about them in the first place when you were designing your protocol. Yuda, what's the situation with time? When is the break?
12:45, 25 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. So, so here is this annoying thing. Identity protection. All these protocols I was showing, I always write identity as part of the flow of the protocol. And again, even though there could be situations where parties know a priori, tomorrow at 3 I'm going to send you a message and you should know it's mine, and you will be able to check that it's mine. But usually that's not the case. Usually people do send their identities over the line, and in most cases in the setting of key exchange, these identities come as a certificate, as a public key certificate. But if you send these public key certificates or identities in the clear, then anyone looking at the communication says, oh, it's Snowden talking to the head of the NSA, for example. You shouldn't know about that. So there are situations where you want to hide identities. Now, you have to differentiate between physical identities and logical identities. If you're working from an IP address, then and that IP address will be visible to the observer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that who is working from that IP address. Of course, we have protocols that intend to hide more than just the identity, but in this case, we are willing to give up on the routing address of the people, but we want to hide their identities. So two cases, two examples are that let's talk more about a peer-to-peer protocol. Like SSL is more a client server. You can think about IPsec more about being peer-to-peer, not necessarily client and server. Anyway, you are let's say you are a mobile user, and someone sends you an initiation of a protocol like IPsec saying, hey, who are you? Okay, when you answer a phone, sometimes you say, this is the residence of Hugo Krawczyk. That's in my case. Because, no, right? Usually you say, who's talking? I mean, the caller will identify first, right? So in the internet, you want that even more because who knows who is talking to you. So you want first the caller to identify, and then only then you will say who you are. One example is this intelligent passport application that I worked once on this thing. Is contactless passports that will tell everything they know about you in the passport to whoever asks for it. But of course, you don't want someone with a reader going on in the airport reading the passports of everyone, saying, hey, how are you? Who are you? Oh, I'm Hugo Krawczyk, and passport number, this and that. So the passport will first authenticate the reader, okay? It has to be a valid reader before I give the information. So that's a case in which the responder to the protocol asks the initiator to reveal himself first. That's a case where we want to hide the identity of the responder and not that of the initiator. On the other case, when you are a roaming user working talking to a gateway, to an office or whatever, you don't want to go and say, okay, in the clear, this is Hugo here, this is Yuda there. So because then everyone will know where everyone is in the world. So in that case, you want to hide the identity of the initiator and to have the responder to authenticate first. So the bottom line is that there are situations in which you want to hide the identity of the initiator, others that you want to hide the responder. Of course, it would be perfect to hide both identities. There are, in theory, possibilities. This comes to issues of gradual exchange of secrets. But we will not get into these more sophisticated protocols that no one would use in practice. In practice, people do these protocols and decide to hide one of the two identities. And in IPsec, that was the case because IPsec really has use cases of the two kinds. Sometimes the initiator needs to be, the identity needs to be hidden, sometimes the responder. In TLS, by the way, where the clients in the typical case don't authenticate, then only the server reveals the name. And there are many situations where hiding the name of the server makes no sense, like if you're talking to Google or something like that. But there are cases in which you don't want that the name of the server you're talking to will be known in the in the network. And let's see why. Okay. Actually, I don't like this. Let me. Okay, so why not? You know, we had this nice, very simple protocol. You know, this is called the one I call ISO, where each party signs the identity of the other party. In this case, can you hide the identity of A? You cannot, because B needs the identity of A already to sign it here. Okay, so you cannot really encrypt A under, let's say, the public key of B or something like this, because B, I mean, this is signature based, okay? So B needs the identity of A, and that means that A needs to send her identity before she can actually authenticate B, because authentication of B needs the identity of A. So this is why this protocol is not good enough for this setting. You can actually use scheme for identity protection, and actually this is the reason why scheme is part of the IKE version 1, because it allows to do this thing, right? The protocol, as I show before, is this one, but since you already are sending an encryption under the public key of B, then you can put the identity of A inside, and here you can put the identity of B inside, and now the identities don't have to go in the clear. What's the problem of this protocol is that for this to work, A needs to know the public key of B beforehand, okay? And here is where problems start, because how does she know? Maybe if she knows, it's fine, but if she's going to ask DNS for the thing or something like that, then she's revealing who she's talking to. Things are tricky, okay? Anyway, we are going to see now a protocol that solves these issues, and let me think about what I want to do. Okay, let me do this, because this is, okay, let me do this. So, the encryption solution requires the public key to be known a priori. This one cannot hide the identity of A because it's needed for B to authenticate. This is an alternative solution. This is protocol STS, station to station, by Diffie, Van Oorschot, and Wiener. This is the paper basically that discovered or showed for the first time this identity misbinding attack. And their solution, since they realized that there is this problem of identity misbinding in which Eve can confuse Alice and Bob to think that they are talking to have inconsistency about the identity they are talking to. So they say the following. One of the properties of the identity misbinding attack is that the attacker does not learn the session key. It confuses you about identities, but it doesn't learn the session key. That was also a property of the what? What's the name? Huh? The TLS? Renegotiation, the renegotiation attack. That also has confusion about identities. The attacker does not learn the session key. Still, he's able to do bad things. So here they say, okay, let's ask the attacker to prove that he knows the session key. The session key is G to the XY. So let's have a proof of knowledge, kind of. And how we are going to do that? We are going to encrypt everything. And by encrypting everything under G to the XY, it means that the attacker knows G to the XY. So this is how the protocol looks. The signature, the protocol that was insecure is the protocol, this protocol without the encryption of K. But once you put the encryption of K, you will not be able to encrypt under K if you don't know G to the XY. So this is something that will prevent Eve from exploiting this attack. So, but the nice thing about this is that now we can actually take the identities A and B, and by the way, this notation I'm using, this curly parentheses with subscript key K, means encryption of everything under the key K. So now we can put the identities inside the encryption, and we solve both the identity misbinding attack, and also we can sign the identities. This, by the way, is related to a protocol called Futuris, which was at the time the original proposal in the Ike protocol. The problem with this thing is that it's insecure. Now, how do you show that it's insecure? So here is an attack that I know that many of you will say, oh, come on. Okay. Say, oh, come on. Okay. So the attack is that what Alice, Eve does is something very simple. She registers the public key, the signature public key of Eve, of Alice as her own. Okay, so Alice has a public key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Eve knows that, it's public information. She takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and she gets a certificate for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Say, come on. Good, come on. So there is one caveat here, and it is that a good CA should ask Eve to prove that she knows the private key corresponding to the key she is certifying, okay? And in that case, she cannot do that, right? Now, not every CA does that. And actually, there are cases where there is no good reason to do that, and I will not get into that by lack of time. But this is a very important issue, by the way. These issues of what you assume for certification authorities is a very important issue in practice. My opinion is that you should not assume anything other than that they check your identity before giving you the certificate. So you come with the public key. You are not asked any question about the public key. You are asked, they ask for your identity. You have to prove somehow that you are who you are. They sign these two things together, your identity and the public key, which is the certificate plus some other stuff, and that's it. No assumption on, and whoever wants to talk about this in the breaks, we can talk more about the practical things related to this issue. But let's say that even if you don't buy that, clearly a protocol that is secure under the setting in which people are not asked to do proof of possession showing the private key. If I can show you a protocol that is secure, even in the case of these weak CAs, then it's better than a protocol that builds on the need of that CA to check that you know the private key. Anyway, if Alice can do that and get a certificate with the same public key of Eve, then everything is very simple for Eve. The only thing she has to do is just replace the certificate of Alice with that of Eve. And that's it. There is no other thing that she needs to do. Because what happens with Bob? Bob says that this thing comes with the certificate of Eve. The signature verifies because it's the same public key of Alice, all right? The key K is correct. Eve doesn't know the key K, right? But doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. She had the service of Alice generating this thing. Alice knew the key. She doesn't know the key, but she doesn't need to know the key. Okay? So this protocol if Alice can have the same key, I mean, certify the same key as Eve, if the same key as Alice, it's absolutely completely broken. Okay, so you don't want to use a protocol like this. It's too fragile for the real world. Okay, and you know there are issues of if the certificate is put inside the encryption, can you still do the attack? Okay. Here there's an issue. So first of all, if the encryption is a stream cipher, it's a one-time pad type thing, you can do the attack. And even if not, you can also do the attack. But I'll show it to you in a stronger variant of the protocol. Using an encryption in order to prove knowledge of a key is a bad idea, okay, as the protocol shows. And in general, encryption is not something that proves knowledge of a key. A better way of doing that is using a MAC, okay? So let's, instead of doing encryption, let's ask the Bob and Alice, and therefore the attacker, if she wants to do something, to MAC the signature with a key K. All right? And okay, so this is fine. Now, I don't know what happened. Is it me? Is it time over or what? Well, let me finish. So we do a MAC instead of an encryption, which is a better way of proving a knowledge of K. Now, there is an attack which has the same effect as before, in which Eve changes the name of Alice to her own, and in this attack, Eve doesn't need to certify the same public key as Alice. This attack is something called an online registration attack. The way it works is that Alice sends it to the X, Bob sends this thing, Eve stops this message, she goes to the CA, and she asks to get a certificate for a public key for which Eve knows the private key. So now it works even if the CA asks for proof of possession. Okay? She gets the certificate fast, comes back, and sends this message. Now, this message uses the certificate that Eve got, okay? And with that particular certificate, the certificate, basically what the certificate does, it generates a collision between a real signature of Eve with the signature of Alice. So now, the signature, this string that is MAC here, is a valid signature of Eve on these values, okay? Under her valid certificate for which she knows the proof of the private key. Okay? The only trick here is that she has to do this very fast to go to the CA and get the certification in the middle of the run of the protocol. How realistic, practical, or not practical this thing depends on the situation. The truth is that at the time that this was done in a paper by Blake and Meneses, at the time it sounded more unrealistic. Today that you can get certificates online, then it's much, this become more realistic. Anyway, the point is that, you can say, I have some situations where this kind of attack will not be realistic, and then I will use this protocol, maybe. But this shows, these protocols will not be secure, and you will not be able to prove them secure in the key exchange models we were talking about. But I'm showing this to show that things are very subtle here. It's easy to come with bad protocols. Yeah, and this remains insecure even if the MAC includes the identities under the thing. It's a very, very, very powerful attack. So what is going on? So the point is that proving knowledge of the key is not the point. The point is in binding the key to the identity. Okay, this is an identity misbinding attack. Is that you are binding the wrong key, I mean the key to the wrong identity. So you have to do something that puts these two things together. And we want to do that. And the ISO protocol actually does that by putting the identity of the peer under the signature. Okay? But now we want to do that in a protocol that has the properties of ISO in the sense of being secure in this model, but at the same time it allows for this identity protection, and that's what brings us to the to the Sigma protocol. In the slides I have another example of another protocol that doesn't work. Actually, I will not go through this, but I'll tell you that the idea is a very intuitive idea. Is okay, the attacker in the identity misbinding doesn't know the key. These guys wanted to use it as an encryption key, as a MAC key, didn't work. So let's do something else. Let's sign the Diffie-Hellman value. Let's sign G to the XY. Okay? Now you can, as an exercise, without looking at the slides, and even if you look at the slides, you don't understand them because they are very unclear. So, so as an exercise, show at least 2 ways of breaking this protocol. Okay? If you find only one, it's not enough. Okay, so, sorry, right? So we start the next part with the Sigma protocols. We'll try to do this fast and then move to implicitly authenticated protocols. Thank you.